Hello friends, this is Growl. In this video, we're going to be covering everything you need to know for Spires of Ascension on Mythic difficulty. I'm going to break down the scary trash mobs, all of the boss encounters, and everything else you need to know along the way. Spires is a mostly linear dungeon, so navigating it isn't too tough. There are some pretty difficult boss fights, so when possible, try to prioritize options that favor single target damage. The dungeon is located in the top right of Bastion, and is a short walk from the Hero's Rest flight point. Each dungeon in Shadowlands has a Covenant-specific effect. Because it is a Kyrian dungeon, if you are a member of this Covenant, you can also pick up spears from dead angels. The spears stun mobs and cause them to take increased damage and can be a big help on some of the more dangerous pulls.
A spear?
I'll get it.
You want me to spear this?
I'll spear.
Now that we got all of that out of the way, let's jump straight into the dungeon. Immediately on the first pathway, you'll run into many of the important mobs you'll see throughout the rest of the dungeon. These Menders have a heal, Forsworn Doctrine, that must be interrupted. Menders also have a buff, Imbue Weapon, which gives them bonus damage after attacks. You can actually purge this buff, forcing the weapon to fall to the ground, and if you pick it up, you receive the damage buff. Ideally, you always want at least one player locking these Menders down if you ever see them in a pack. Forsworn Castigators just have damage dealing casts, so stop them whenever possible, but it's not a high priority. Dark Lash deals straight damage, and Burden of Knowledge deals damage and then leaves a damage over time magic effect on the target. Lastly, on this first part is Forsworn Goliaths. These Goliaths are quite annoying with a lot of health and ability called Recharge Anima, which puts them in a defensive state and creates a large absorption barrier. Their only other cast is Rebellious Fist. It's quite a long cast at 3 seconds, but this ability deals large amounts of damage and is a high priority to stop. You can Bloodlust a big group of mobs in the beginning here, or save it for the first boss, which isn't too far away. After clearing the first platform, you click on this Kyrian Angel to take you across to the next platform. The large amount of RP time in this dungeon can be a bit annoying, but the aesthetics are totally worth it. The big pack before the first boss puts your mob control abilities to the test, with every mob previously mentioned in one big pack. Make sure you're locking down the Mender and the Goliath at all times. Once that pack is dead, you move on to the first boss, Kintara. When you kill Kintara or their bird buddy, the other one enrages, so the goal of the fight is to kill them close to the same time. The bird doesn't attack, it just flies around the room and casts Attenuated Barrage, shooting orbs out across the room that deal massive damage. If you kill Kintara, the bird will enrage and start to attack as well, applying venom. Kintara does attack, however, and must be tanked. Overhead Slash is cast on the tank and does large amounts of damage to the tank and anyone else nearby. On the beta, this ability was hitting really hard, so be careful where the boss is facing. Kintara will also apply Dark Lance to nearby players, occasionally that inflicts a small amount of damage over time. Every minute the boss will fly into the air and start hurling charged spears at random players. Make sure you use a defensive ability when one is flying towards you and move out of the puddle it leaves as soon as possible. These things hurt, but you can't dodge them. If you try and use a Mage Blink or get away from it, it will follow you, so don't bring it to your allies. After the boss is dead, you can choose to go right or left. The right path looks safe, but there's actually many hidden stealth claws. These mobs stun when they come out of stealth, and also apply a bleed to the aggro target. For my dungeon runs, we preferred going left as it seems slightly easier. There you'll find skirmishers, which are essentially just archers that do range damage. They also do have disengage, which will occasionally jump away from the tank, so be careful not to let them jump into another pack. Coming up is one of the most annoying mobs in the dungeon, Squad Leaders. These mobs have an aura that gives 75% damage reduction to all nearby allies, so you need to focus them down first. Every 15 or 20 seconds, they fly into the air and charge down on an area, doing damage, knocking back enemies, and leaving a pool that deals damage as well. They also cast Crashing Strike, which is a frontal, so be sure to get out of the way from these guys. Alongside this first squad leader is a champion. Champions are the exact same as Menders, they have the weapon buff and the heal, so make sure you're stopping them. Next you'll encounter a pack of Ether Divers. The Venom cast should be stopped and applies a damage over time. It isn't too dangerous, but with packs of many of them, this damage can add up. After that, there's another pack with a squad leader, this time paired with an Inquisitor. This mob has range damage cast as well that should be stopped when possible. There are also more hidden stealth claws at the end of this area patrolling around, so watch out for those. This next area has some patrols, so be careful with how you pull it. There's a Forsworn Goliath in the corner that you mostly want to avoid. If you're fast, you can pull the Ether Divers without aggroing the Goliath and then walk by later. The patrol is a squad leader, a Goliath, and Inquisitor. Make sure you're focusing down the squad leader while disrupting the others. The pack before the second boss is one of the most dangerous in the dungeon from either side. Another squad leader to focus down with some other mobs that deal heavy damage. If you're worried about this pack, you can use some CC to make things easier, but you usually want to use Bloodlust or Hero on the second boss. Ventunax, the second boss, is challenging but one of my favorites in Shadowlands. It's an extremely simple fight but can be quite difficult to execute. Every 20 seconds the boss uses Dark Stride, jumping on a random non-tank player and giving them a large physical damage over time effect that lasts for 20 seconds. Each time she jumps, a Shadow Whirl is also created. The Shadow Whirl shoots out bolts similar to the bird on the first boss, which deal massive amounts of damage and also knock you up far into the air. After every 2 jumps, the boss will cast Recharge. While the boss is recharging, the Shadow Whirls around the room will go crazy, sending dark bolts everywhere. We found tanking the boss on one side of the room so that she leaves the Shadow Whirls there, and then having a range stand on the other side is the safest way. The boss will also cast Blinding Flash, which is a very easy to dodge frontal attack. You guys never get hit by those, right? After defeating the second boss, you're taken to the last platform. This area has some pretty dangerous packs, so skipping these can be beneficial. The first mob, the Helion, has the same jump in the air attack as the squad leader. It also has Crescendo, which deals a large amount of damage in 4 cardinal directions starting at the tank. This can be really tough to notice and dodge since you have to stand diagonal to the mob. Right after that is another pack of a Goliath, Warden, and Helion. You can sneak along the side of this area to get around this pack, and it is highly recommended. At the top of the stairs waits a Justicar, Warden, and Goliath. These you won't be able to skip without some sort of stealth or CC, so if you don't have a way to skip it, you'll be forced to fight. The Warden is just another copy of the Mender with a heal and weapon cast. The Justicar has damage dealing casts, however it's quite hard to lock down since the Warden and Goliath both have pretty important casts that must be stopped as well. On either side is a small pack of mobs fighting. These may look super dangerous, but many of the mobs are usurpers. These are quite weak and die fairly quickly to AoE. Clear as little as you have to of this whole area, because none of it is needed to fight the boss. Oryphrion is a giant Goliath boss with fairly simple mechanics. Charge Stomp is a tank hit that deals damage to everyone around the tank, so be sure to stand clear. Occasionally the boss shoots a Purifying Blast, which deals initial damage and damage over time to anyone hit by it. If you're targeted, make sure you run away from the group, but just remember to not go near the tank. When the boss casts Ordnance, everyone but the tank should stack together and then run out at the same time, as after the cast it will leave pools on the ground. Once the boss runs out of energy, it will start the next phase. During the drained phase, the boss will take 100% increased damage and stop attacking, so save your big cooldowns for this moment. Each pool that you dropped will turn into an orb and attempt to make it back to the boss to recharge it. Every orb that reaches the boss will shorten the burn phase and also deal damage to all players, so you want to soak as many of these as possible. We found the best strategy is to leave the puddles all close together and have the tank or a DPS with an immunity soak as many as possible. When the soaked orbs burst, they deal damage and a stacking damage over time effect to anyone nearby, so you can't soak this many without having heavy defensive cooldowns. Once you defeat Oryphrion, you can travel upwards to the final boss. Before you fight Devos, however, you must fight the 3 mini-bosses. Each mini-boss has their own special ability, and then when you defeat that boss, the ability transfers to the other living bosses, making them stronger. Astronos has this charged spear that gets thrown on the ground and shoots crescendos similar to the Helion in the previous room. Lakesys has an aura of oppression that increases the damage that nearby enemies take that stacks every 3 seconds up to 20. Klodos has an aura that deals damage to nearby enemies and stacks up to 20 as well. The last one you fight can be really tough because you have to deal with both auras and the spears. In a coordinated group, we've been able to pull 2 at once and burst them down, but pulling them 1 at a time is considerably safer. Once the 3 mini-bosses are clear, Devos will appear. This fight is actually pretty straightforward and is the easiest of the 4 boss fights in my opinion. Throughout the fight, she casts Lingering Doubt and Lost Confidence. These should be dispelled by the healer when possible, but don't deal too much damage. Run Through is a frontal sort of attack, so be sure to get out of the way when she's casting that. Abyssal Detonation is a 4-second cast that deals lethal damage to anyone hit by it. To protect yourself from the cast, you must find the Bastion, a bubble shield that will be somewhere in the room at all times. At 70% and 30% health, the boss will phase and jump off the platform. When the boss phases, the party takes some damage, so be sure that you're topped and ideally press a defensive ability since there isn't much more damage throughout the fight. During the intermission, you must collect the raw anima orbs and return them to the spear. You don't have to click anything or press any action buttons, just walk over the orb and then walk to the spear. Although it can be a bit annoying as the winds will push you slowly off the platform. Once the spear is active, one player can grab it and throw it at Devos and bring her back to the platform. Once the spear hits, she returns and the first phase starts again. Simply get her down to 0% health and the dungeon is over. Collect your loot and go again. That wraps up my dungeon guide for Spires of Ascension. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or tips that you think I may have missed, drop them down in the comments for people later on. If you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you gave it a like and subscribe to my channel. I'll be coming out with guides for each mythic dungeon and raid boss. Happy keying!